Good evening and welcome to Perspective. Orlando, France, Germany, Japan. We will be talking about the recent erratic spate of violence that has broken out all over and traumatized thousands of people. Are these violent crimes the acts of a troubled individual, marginalized for one reason or another, or part of a terrorist organization? We're going to look into the psychological and the societal aspects of this kind of violence that's new to us all. Thank you so much for being with us today. I have with me Abdul Basit Saab, who is an expert on terrorism, Dr. Ayza Yazdani Abid, who is an educational psychologist, and Amir Rana Saab, who heads his own think tank, Pakistan Institute of Peace Studies. Thank you so much for joining me today. Basit Saab, to start off with you, massacre in Nice, the axe attack on the German train, shooting spree in Munich, the suicide bomb in southern Germany, within such a short span of time, it has really traumatized individuals all over. Why this new form of violence?
It is not new, it has always been there. It is just that the frequency of such incidents in Europe has increased as compared to the past. There are reasons for that. There are historical reasons, there are regional reasons for that. You got to look at it that there are two hot spots of conflict in immediate proximity of the Europe. One is Syria, the other is Iraq. If you compare it with the past two theaters of conflict, one was the tribal regions of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Right. So very few people from Europe were mobilized towards this region. Compared to that, if you look at Iraq and Syria, these conflict, quite a large number of volunteers, they have been called as foreign fighters, have been mobilized from different countries of Europe. Largest numbers have come from France, then we have Britain, Belgium, etc. So that mobilization is one factor. Proximity to Syria and Iraq is another. So right. the ideology has traveled. But that is one reason.
Basab, let me come back to you on that. Dr. Ayza, isn't it true that, whether these individuals who are psychologically impaired or, are not quite well, if they are being used or whether they are being targeted by these terrorist organizations, isn't this a new trend?
I think let's not say that these are psychologically impaired people, because I'm sure they are not carrying out any as such psychological check when they are recruiting people. It is more of, like Basit Saab said, a historical perspective, because when children are growing up in an environment, they are burdened with their history. Muslims, they know what happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, it troubles. And when youngsters are growing up, they are teenagers, they are developing their identities. So they are trying to find out who they are, and this happens with every individual anywhere in the world. Now, some people, some individuals, they have family support, they have good education and whatever, they have a good background and a healthy physical disposition, and a lot of time they can come out of such problems. But sometimes they are coming from backgrounds where they have already problems. They have psychological problems from the start, because now we are coming to the realization that children who have certain problems in childhood because of their family environment, because of traumatic exposure, right. because of certain other injuries or whatever experiences.
Like in a lot of cases, these are immigrants, so they're
no,
dealing
not necessarily. I'm talking about the average person right. in Pakistan.
But I'm talking with specific to this kind of violence. We've seen yes. that it is sometimes in a more than one case that there are immigrants that have actually acted out.
Yes, but then if you go back in their past, something right. has happened, right. their personality has so developed that they are vulnerable. And why do they listen to those people who are inciting the violent trends? If I have a bad background, I may not become violent, but somebody may become violent because I have the right environment for
right,
getting
right.
that.
Amir Rana Saab, is it this vulnerability you think that makes them targets for this sort of terrorism, and then it makes them terrorists of this kind?
No, this is not the case. The most of the research has been conducted recently, especially in the Europe, and one of the best research basically examined the 550 profiles of the militant and who had traveled to Syria and Iraq. Nobody had found that they had any troubled childhood or they had any other psychological problems. They were and they are quite rational actors. They do not have any historical burden. They are ideologically motivated.
Right.
Yes, one thing is common in all these cases, that they somehow at certain level a sense of humiliation triggered. It doesn't cause because of the religion, or they are living in the peripheries or the satellite towns in the Europe, and these may be the factor or their economic background.
But like
So,
Dr.
yeah.
Ayza is saying, maybe that humiliation at an early age
Humiliation
makes
is
them
not
more
easy to
susceptible.
define. This is not easy to define. This is more a political science term. So we cannot even define in a psychological or even the this medical terms. So this is purely now a political terms, and when we say the political, it will have the lot of factors who evolve and factor in this humiliation. So this is important task not only for the Europe or the US, I think for the Muslim countries as well.
Right.
So they have the commonalities. The similar kind of the sense of humiliation can be triggered here in the
Right.
elite
It
classes.
can be used anywhere,
in Bangladesh.
and this violence obviously
or-
can
yes.
increase. Basit sahab, you were explaining that it's not new. This form of violence, you know, where a person just comes out and just takes drives and just drives over people. This sort of violence.
If you look at what happened during the era of neo-Nazi atrocities and
Right.
continue to trace it all the way to the current form of violence, it has been there. It's just that it is happening now in Europe. So they are waking up to
But
this.
Nazis were also in Europe.
Yeah, but they are waking up to this form of violence now. So if you look at the overall medical, milieu, that has drastically changed. The threshold of violence has come down. So the tendencies were pretty much there, as Amir Sahab said, the triggers were there, but the threshold was a bit high, so they were not engaging in such high level of violence. But with the advent of ISS, which has given them a new ideology, again as Amir Sahab said, and channelized those grievances in a very systematic way. So you have two types of attacks.
But what has ISIS really done? It has given them a legitimacy, so to speak.
Yes, one, because they have given them the ideology. Ideology justifies the attack. So there are two types of attacks which are taking place, either IS directed or operated or IS inspired. Both ways it gets them the publicity, and for these individuals they channel their grievances. All of the sudden, why the incidence of violence has gone up, there are two immediate reasons for that. Number one, as the flow of foreign fighters to Iraq and Syria has slowed down, because they were taking different routes, they were going via Turkey and other countries. Right. So effective border control and stringent security mechanisms have made it impossible or rather difficult for them to travel to Europe. So right. Those individuals who were trying to go there, now when they cannot go there, so they are carrying out those attacks now here, because they cannot go to the so-called right. Khilafah there. Number two, in the last few months, ISIS has lost territory both in Iraq, around 40%, 20% in Syria. So as they are losing territory, they are trying to keep themselves relevant. So the incidence of violence outside these two regions or Middle East has gone up.
They own up to, they own up to these incidents after also, right?
Even if they are not remotely involved, they will just jump in to claim the attacks because it gets them the publicity. So for all these individuals, there are plethora of reasons. You see, the Middle Eastern policies of these Western countries is one reason. What is going on within the Muslim majority countries, as Amir Sahab said, is another reason.
Right.
So the policies of these countries, they come together, and a combination of internal factors, external factors, there are social elements to it, living in the periphery, marginalization. So you cannot pinpoint that one particular factor is causing. At the individual level, these things will widely differ. You cannot just have one generalized format or a trend which tells you that these are the reasons why these people. So at individual level, these reasons will vary from one person to the other.
Let me come back to you on that. Dr. Ayza, right, is it true that these individuals are seeking the glory, or they're seeking publicity, and that because obviously it will come on the media, and of course it's something that horrendous will be looked horrifically upon by the world. Is in some way, are we glorifying these attackers, and are we perpetuating more instances like this because they're getting what they want, so to speak?
Well, media is definitely playing a role in that. First, we didn't have this much information, access to the information, so things were spreading slowly. And youngsters, they, like I said before, they are developing their identity. They need to identify with some thought, with some process, and they need to find some satisfaction in that. And the more they identify, the more they will go for glorification or whatever extreme they may want to go. We are a Pakistani, we display flags, and similarly in that sense. Now,
Sense of identity.
Sense of identity. It
Right.
makes us what we are. Now, the thing is, we are human beings. We don't exist in a vacuum. We have a family, a system, a society around us. My point is that the world is now connected more and more. So sitting here, I know what is happening in another corner of the world, right?
Right.
Now youngsters are more and more exposed. They have their sympathies, and when I talk about history, and I believe in this, there is a transgenerational trauma in us. We identify ourselves with what happened to the Muslims around the world 20 years ago, 40 years ago, right? Now what happens is that if we
But just as a follow-up, because you're vulnerable, does that
Yes.
make you identify more with the plight of certain classes or certain religions? Is that true also?
It does to a certain extent, but like I said, your environment matters. You may outgrow from it if you are moving on in your life, but then the point is, the narrative is always changing. That is why we cannot say there's one reason for the killings there and for why people are joining, because the narrative is always changing. You will find a number of reasons, and that's why psychologists, we cannot just come up and say, okay, this is one reason why one becomes this kind of a person, because there
can be numerous reasons.
There are always reasons.
Amir, Rana Saab, Basit Saab and Dr. Ayza are both saying that, you know, obviously there can't be one reason for such acting out, so to speak. But what's the common thread then? There must be a common thread in these troubled individuals, in these kind of spates of violence, when they participate in this kind of violence. There has to be some. What are the common factors?
Have you ever played any video game, especially the new editions of the games?
Right.
So if you have played, then you can understand better the grammar and the
Right.
background of all the madness which is going on in the Europe. In most of the
That's an interesting way to look at it.
And they feel the part of a broader chessboard or the game board, motherboard, and they act like that. So this is identified in their profile, and even the tactic they used recently in the US and in the Europe is the similar like the new editions of the games, whether it's in Germany.
Right.
And so there is a similarity. So what it can help us to understand
Right.
that they were isolated, they bit radicalized somehow in the cyberspaces, their first connection been established in the cyberspaces,
Right.
and they try to be the part of this ideal world, which is basically had the domain within the cyber world. And this IS right now, and before that it was Al-Qaeda, is basically deciding the rule of the games. They're providing the grammar, they are inventing, transforming all the rules for these games. So this is, I think, the simplistic view which we can understand. If you go in depth, I think it will not lead this kind of the discussion on TV channels to any conclusion. So this is, if we will talk about each and every character, so you will find a lot of complexities in the character. So why we are focusing only on the individuals? Then there we must have to be look at the group profiles, how groups evolve, and other political, ideological, religious factors. So for the common viewer, it's quite easy to understand what is going on. It's
But
like
what-
the video game.
But Basit Saab, what political indigenous factors, like Amir Rana Saab has mentioned, obviously one fact is that, you know, because organizations like ISIS seek glorification. If an act like this happens, they can stamp it by saying that, you know, yes, they even afterwards they stamp it. But what other political indigenous factors are particularly relevant?
Their integration into the broader European societies is one big factor. All the CVE programs, the Countering Violent Extremism program, which were started in Europe following 9/11, they were meant to integrate them, but they ended up further marginalizing them, because at the end of the day, when you pinpoint somebody's religious practices, it becomes an issue of identity. So certain Muslim females in Europe were not wearing hijab because they believe in those religious practices, but they made it a marker of their identity, that it is their individual choice that, you know, hijab belongs to them. At the end of the day, whether they want to wear hijab or not, it should be left to them. Nobody can force them to wear it, or nobody can force them to take it off. So it became issues of identity.
It became a sense of identity,
so it was
like
shaped in
we
that
were talking
way.
about.
Yes, so it was shaped in that way that they felt marginalized. Then there are issues of foreign policies, participation of different European militaries in Afghanistan, then in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and we can go on. So they felt angry with that also. And then came ISIS, and it used all those channels through cyberspace. YouTube is one of them, Facebook, then Twitter, etc. And they asked them to come over and join them. So do the hijrah. If you cannot do the hijrah, then stay back in Europe and wait for the orders. So they put the ideology out there. They gave them the list of grievances and potential targets and how to hit them. If you cannot have explosive, even you know, a truck, a lorry is a potential weapon. So just you drive a lorry and plough through crowds, that's a weapon. If you cannot get anything, get a kitchen knife and, you know, start, God forbid, stabbing people with that. That has happened in China. Same attacks have been now, you know, copycat attacks have been carried out in Europe. So one way or the other, no matter what you do, they are gonna go after these people. Problem with Europe is, unlike the US or other countries like Pakistan, which have suffered so much at the hands of terrorism, the laws are such like that you can deal with evolving situations, and there is flexibility. So military has a bigger say in that. Problem with Europe is the entire European continent is not that well integrated and coordinated when it comes to intelligence sharing, when it comes to law enforcement. So there are certain laws. People are entitled to certain rights. So when you have to trial someone, you have to go through due process of law, and that takes quite a lot of time. And if you cannot furnish the evidence, the people can go scot-free, and that is creating trouble. So
you think the process of law itself,
in a way, they are good laws. In a way, they are good laws. Yes, in a way, they are good laws. But when it comes to terrorism, you are faced with a special situation like an emergency kind of situation. You have to have more flexibility. You have to have more coordinated intelligence and more robust law enforcement, so you can go after these guys. The mastermind of the Paris attack, he was sitting in Montpellier for almost 4 months, but nobody could touch him because there were certain laws. As long as you don't fulfill them, you cannot touch him. People knew that there were certain neighborhoods which were problematic, but they couldn't go after them because you have to fulfill the laws.
So you think that the laws need to be perhaps more strict?
At a very technical level, yes, but it is far beyond the laws. As Amir Sahab said, if you go in the depth of these things, the complexities will come out. At a very technical level, at the surface, the least they can do is have better law, coordinated intelligence to deal with the situation.
Dr. Ayza, but particularly with regard to these individuals, as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, what do you think can be done to deal with such kind of sprouting of such kind of behavior and these behavioral patterns that are coming out in people? Like we've agreed that they're marginalized or they're vulnerable at a certain age, and they want to associate with a particular kind of group or a particular organization, a particular religion.
The thing is that when parents, the society, the teachers, the educational institutions, when they are not doing their job, they are creating a vacuum. Now, if particularly in Pakistan, we have a system of tuitions, so the children are being shunted back and forth. The role models are not there anymore. The teachers, they are the role models, but when they are not working, when they are not doing activities in the school, there are no extracurricular activities. What does the child do? There are no sports. We have no sports
But
heroes.
one would suppose that these, I mean, particularly with regard to Europe, all these facilities are more or less provided for. So why then, you know, what can be done in those cases? And I mean, you have the kind of care that you're talking about, no tuitions there, the schools are equipped much better than in the rest of the world, there is extracurricular activity. So why then?
The vacuum for those people is different, because they are at a developed stage. We are not at a developed stage yet, so we are a little far behind the basic necessities. For them, the scenario will be different in other sense, where they want to have role models, but then there is an emptiness maybe in their lives. Just having a job and what we consider important right now is not enough for them. They have gone beyond that stage.
Right.
And so maybe they are looking for a higher level of spiritual role and a life. Here we are at the basics, so here it is totally different. Here we are going for physical things.
But does that make the fact that they're looking for a higher spiritual entity, or they're looking for some sort of ideology to cling on to, how do we deal with that then? How do we deal with that particular breed of violent people?
I think since we are here, we need to work more on what we are doing here. The Europeans, I think the rest of the world, they are well prepared how to deal with their own people there, because they are centuries advanced from us, right?
But Amir Rana Sahab, I'll come back to you, Dr. Ayza. Amir Rana Sahab, isn't it true that yes, you know, whether they're vulnerable, whether they're susceptible to ideology or not, the whole world is now vulnerable to this sort of terrorism coming forth?
No, we cannot generalize the things that the whole world or the whole.
No, I'm saying
youth
that
is
anybody,
vulnerable.
I'm saying anyone can get up and use this.
No, this is not the case. This is our simplification of the issues. Most of these terrorists did these kind of acts of terrorism, whether in the US or everywhere. More than 90% of the cases, police and law enforcement agencies were already knew that they are vulnerable. They were under surveillance, except in the cases of Indonesia recently and in Bangladesh. In most of the cases, police knew that they are vulnerable. They have the very strict surveillance system. So this cannot be generalized.
No, but
as I
why
had
can't-
mentioned that they had some specific character. Nobody can identify. This can lead one person towards extremism or the violent extremism, or towards crime, or maybe toward. This is the biggest problem
But
for
why
right
can't
now
it
for the
to
academia.
someone like me, a lay person, for example, our viewers also, why can't it lead to that same thing happening in Pakistan, for example? God forbid, and I hope it doesn't happen ever.
It's happening already. It's happening.
No, but I'm saying that, like you're saying, isn't we are more susceptible? Are we not now generally to this kind of form of violence?
Right now, the biggest challenge is that there is a certain level of the tendencies exist among the youth, whether it's the Muslims, non-Muslims. Might you be aware that many of the IS members who had traveled to Syria were the new converts, and in 3 attacks so far, there's a new converts found involved. In Pakistan, in this region, you will find the similar kind of the tendencies. But this is the real question right now for the experts, for academia, for practitioners, that which all these characters, the same factor led one person towards extremism, other to some other immoral behaviors, some towards even the more protective activities. So
Right.
this is
So it triggers a
and
different
this is not,
reaction in different
yes,
kind
this
of
is
people.
not about, again, this is not about the general characters. So they are studying the vulnerable characters, and they can be easily identified. One person, if living in a community, if he suddenly start going into mass, we are taking all this debate in the European context. Suddenly, the law enforcement agencies get vigilant. Even the communities where these law enforcement agencies have their extensive spying network, they become vigilant. They see there is some changes coming behavior, he becoming more religious. But at the same time, those who committed the act of violence, especially the Paris one, those who were in the Molenbeek, they were not practicing Muslim. Even the lady who, the cousin of this guy, the Husna, she hadn't any radical or the religious profile, but later identified they were engaged with in radical activities. They were in contact with their handlers in Raqqa, So this is vary from character to character.
We've
So this is
agreed.
religion is not the basic purpose again.
But you think they're
two
easily
thing have-
spottable?
This is not. I'm not saying that nothing is possible. I'm saying
no,
this is the research question
I'm
right
sorry,
now.
you
The big
haven't
challenge.
understood the
We
question.
are trying
I'm
to
saying,
understand. The
are
world
they
is
easily
trying to understand.
spottable? They obviously we've
Yes,
agreed that they're
this is-
variable. I mean, they
this
have
is-
variable tendencies. They're not one kind. We can't generalize, but they are easily spottable. You're saying these kind of troubled individuals
Yeah.
who may then act out.
Maybe the one person, as I'm saying, that you cannot generalize. One person who start going mosque, two persons start going mosque. One adopted more radical behavior, but other become bit moderate, tolerant, a productive, or you can say the good citizen. So how you can? So this is the big challenge. Where this? What I had
Exactly.
said that one thing which has been identified factor, humiliation, which can trigger anybody, and the second, or which already have been discussed, then empowerment. How I can become powerful to take revenge of this humiliation, and it also comes in a different form. It may not be to joining only the Al-Qaeda or IS.
Right.
It may be joining some political movement,
Right,
joining
exactly.
some social movement. So this
Right.
is the big question right now. I think
Right.
all these sciences are right now under transformation,
Right.
identifying the factors, finding out the solutions.
Right. Basit sahab, there is criticism, and experts all over the world have said that they fear that the image of one high-profile act can ferment others. That's also a fact, right? Like Amir Saab is just saying that, you know, obviously there is not one identifying factor. We've agreed that we can't generalize. But I'm just trying to look for, I mean, there must be some sort of a thread, maybe, a common thread. And how will it form? Do you think it will ferment others?
It does. When you carry out one particular act, it motivates others to do the same. Because it sets a precedence, and once a precedence has been set, and if it is doable with low cost and with easy access to any means of tools that can inflict violence, people will try to do that. To your question that, you know, why this has happened, generally, they have been looking for meaning in their lives. They are searching for meaning. It is a struggle for recognition. Europe perhaps failed to empower them, failed to give them a meaning. What does it mean to be a European Muslim, which is again an identity factor. ISIS just jumped in, channelized those grievances, and gave them that sense of empowerment. This is what it means to be a good Muslim.
Right.
They thought that that was the right channel for them to migrate and subscribe to that brand of Islam, which Europe failed to evolve. What they were trying to do was inculcate the European values into those Muslims without realizing that the Islamic values have to go hand in hand with that. So a particular survey in Europe found out that, you know, the common thread was then that all these European and American Muslims told these authorities that you watch us, but you do not look at us. You hear us, but you do not listen to us. That was quite shocking for them, that surveillance is pretty much there, but when it comes to the issues of the Muslims, that is where they are blind. So whenever such attacks happen, the questions like why they hate us, why they hit us, why so much of violence, this is when they'll go and ask the Muslims. But when the actual genuine grievances are there, nobody from the policy circles will reach out to the Muslim communities and ask them what their troubles are. When a particular community becomes vulnerable, you know, through community engagement, they will try to infiltrate the societies and try to keep an ear or an eye on them, what is going on. But in a general good atmosphere, when things are normal, nobody will be reaching out to them. So what kind of a message does it give to a community which is vulnerable? It further alienates them. These things, in my own opinion, one entire generation of the European Muslims have been lost to the likes of ISIS and these brands of extremist ideologies. It's a generational effort now. It will take not less than 8 to 10 years. As Amir Sahab said, now the academia, the policy making circles, intelligentsia is grappling with very tough questions, psychological, theoretical, empirical questions, sociological questions, political questions, that why is this happening and how can we redeem ourselves from such things. So at a very top level, from structural factors to at the bottom, social factors, psychological, individual factors, and in the middle you have the law enforcement. Everything has to evolve gradually, but when you get the right answers, only then you can get to the right solutions. Research is struggling with these questions. We have few answers but not definitive answer. So things are evolving. We are dealing with fourth generation jihadists who have their stakes in cyberspace more in a utopia world rather than in the real world, because when they travel to Raqqa, to Iraq and all these areas, they find that whatever they were shown is not there. There is misery, there are killings, there is no so-called heaven, caliphate like heaven for them, waiting for them there. So then they wake up to these realities. But as long as it remains in the cyber, as long as it is in the cyber world, the utopia is created, and that utopia is very dangerous.
Very dangerous. Dr. Ayza, the utopia is very dangerous, like Basit Sahab is saying. What can we do psychologically to address these issues?
That's like asking for the moon, but let's start like the earlier it was pointed out that the video games we have, this present generation is plugged. So there's a new term, let's unplug them, and because they are constantly fixed on devices and their mind is getting overactive, and that is why it is becoming very hard for them to focus on to practical matters at hand. They are fighting battles sitting here and they are playing imaginary games, and they are named by countries, by people, and countries fighting against each other. So this is one factor, that video games are a great problem. Secondly, I will always emphasize the individual, and when we go for the individuals, the educational institutions matter. So what are we giving? I have come across teachers who are glorifying their acts of jihad or their past exploits, or mentioning other people. Now for the average child, even in the most elitist of Pakistani schools and everywhere, our youngsters are radicalized. Parents have no idea. Actually, teenagers lead a double life. They don't share everything, and we can't expect them to share everything with their parents. So between the age of 12 to 20, know what your child is doing, be involved with the child, tell him guide the child to the goodness of humanity. The message of Idi Saab is the best we could have in this country. So working for humanity, going for a moral goal which is good for all. If we go for
involving them in these activities from the start, maybe
yes, teach them to give. If you are just spoon feeding your children and you just don't know what is going on in the lives of your children, so automatically they will find things to do on their own. Secondly, we have to come up with a strong let's say narrative, let's say dialogue or whatever. We need to be ready with what we have to teach these children. Things are happening in the world. We are not able to come up in the press or in the plays or in the theatre, or we don't have theatre that much for. We don't have venues of entertainment. We don't allow them any means of entertainment. So what will they do? I always ask this question: when you stop a child from doing one thing, are you giving him an option? So then what is the child going to do? So basically, we need to keep them busy. We need to keep them focused on what is good and what is busy, and therefore evolve our educational policies and the rest from there.
Amir Sahab, what do the counter-terrorism experts feel? How do we prepare now for this new form?
I think that we sometime become quite obsessed with the terms like radicalizations, and we start, you can say, the tagging even the normal behaviors as the radical behaviors, and this is the big problem. It looks like the states, whether in the West or in the East, we want to control the minds of the youth. So this is not sure that how you can control the minds, and we always talk about providing these things, this kind of the environment, putting your youth in this kind of the situations, or to be, so this kind of the things, I think it's not going to be provide you the answer.
You don't
Less
think
open,
that we
no,
can
no,
deal
the
with this?
less natural growth is important for each is the rights of the kid and the youth. What we can do, there is two approaches are possible. One, if there are the vulnerable characters, to create the some measures that they will not become harmful, and to identify the ways, the areas, to only to address, to target these vulnerable, to rehabilitate them.
Right.
Yeah, so this is the only way. Even you cannot minimize the chances level of the vulnerabilities. It's or always exist. Sometimes it took the name of the religion, sometimes it's the other
Right.
left or right ideologies or the social movements. This is the way of the, we can minimize the damage, the social damage, or in even the political or in the security perspective, we can minimize the damages through providing certain environments, not controlling the minds. The second, this engineering with the minds or the thinking pattern, this is more dangerous. This is what the Muslim states right now doing, whether this is from Saudi Arabia to Malaysia, on the name of de-radicalization, moderate religious scholars, so they are engaging. They are trying to be engineering their thoughts. This is not the way.
So one
Allow
way maybe
them
is to target these, obviously these
Yeah.
terrorist groups. But like Amir Sahab is saying, Basit Sahab, and I agree with him, there will always be these vulnerable elements in society, who are more susceptible to be targeted by these organizations. And one way is to wipe out these organizations which are the terrorist organizations. But won't the terrorist organizations always be there also?
They will always be there, but a terrorist organization, even if you physically, eliminate them, as long as the ideology lives on, you cannot, say safely that, the phenomena has been dealt with or taken care of. Because if the ideology is there, there will always be individual who will come together and form a new group under a new name. So there was no Daesh or ISIS, but from Al-Qaeda we saw Daesh coming out, and then tomorrow there will be a new monster, and the monster continues to live on. So what can you do? I think the first question is, we need to ask ourselves why the vulnerable youth become attractive to the ideologies or messages or publications of such militant or extremist organization.
Right.
Because they have certain questions and they are seeking answers to those questions.
Right.
When you shy away from providing those answers to those questions, and
Right.
if they find answers of those questions in those ideologies, in those messages, those speeches or those publications, they are naturally attracted, and this is where they are sucked in. So try to provide them those answers. Don't shy away. See, scholars like, yes, there might be some problems with the idea of moderate Muslim scholars, but a scholar like Javed Ghamidi Sahab, he couldn't live in Pakistan. What happened? He was providing answers to the issues which were considered as taboos in our society. He was addressing the genuine core issues of the youth, something which the traditionalists just could not fathom. So Ghamidi Sahab had to leave Pakistan. So question really is that, are you going to shy away from those real issues which you consider as taboos, but youth harbor them in their minds? And if you don't provide them the answers, if the likes of Al-Qaeda or Daesh are providing the answers, then you will lose your youth to them. So take care of your youth, own your youth, have a youth policy, have a proper education policy, more importantly a placement policy. If you do not provide them with the livelihood opportunity, what I'm trying to say is, create stakes of the youth in your system.
Right.
If the stakes are gone, you have lost your youth to something. He might be, somewhere in the vacuum,
be any
and
organization,
if
any
he
terrorist
sees
group.
lights at the end of the tunnel, towards any particular organization or a messaging, he will start following that path. So you have to come in, you have to own your youth, you have to provide those answers to them. So you, what I'm trying to say is, you have to open up a bit and have a more frank discussion with your youth, engage them, provide them the proper platforms where they can vent their grievances. So their involvement in politics is important, mainstream politics. So religiously, where can they engage and who will provide them the answers?
And the proper religious guidance.
Guidance, what is proper religious guidance? You have to leave it to them to decide. But at least provide them that conducive environment. As long as that doesn't happen, if you only end up confining them to a security object, that we see a threat from particular set of individuals, so they are a security object, and then we seek certain changes in their behaviors, I think that is a very limited way of looking at a very broad phenomenon.
Right.
You got to take a wholesome approach, target your youth, see what are the trends, what are their demands, and 10-15 years down the road, what will be their requirements. So tailor your society as per those requirements.
Thank you so much for joining me. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. The spate of the kind of violence that we've been recently seen, perhaps the answer lies in us, the answer lies in our addressing the issues, like we talked about, addressing the issues of the youth and giving them a platform to voice their vulnerabilities, their issues, their grievances, so that they're not susceptible to different terrorist groups, different organizations, and they're not breeded as terrorists. Thank you so much for joining me today on Perspective.